To best describe the ensuing events concerning this family encounter, the author begs the reader's indulgence. He must rely on his personal experience in conjunction with the vague information gleaned from his uncle. This proviso is deemed necessary because most of the conversation relating to that climactic confrontation entangling his deceitfully acquired in-laws, was conducted in hysterical and frenzied Yiddish. Luckily Albert did not understand, and given her compassionate nature, Dorothy did not care to translate. The one point my uncle was very clear on was when Dorothy informed her parents of their marriage, along with her condition, all hell broke loose. Caught completely by surprise by her father's sudden display of fury, poor Albert surmised he'd gravely misunderstood Jewish fatherly love. This is a common error often made by individuals who fail to understand Semitic and other ancient cultures. They usually regard daughters as an embarrassment and a worthless expense to be tolerated, while sons are wealth, joy and immortality personified. Dorothy's father, knowing he was dealing with a Gentile schlemiel, wasted no time in grabbing the opportunity presented to him. Is to say, to justifiably rid himself of a displeasing and now disgraceful by reacting in the ruthless manner opted to him, according to the laws of his Semitic creed and personality. Rather than mercifully and quickly showing them the door, he proceeded to insult and berate her in ways only a righteous father can. He pointed out everything he had ever done for her, though closely avoiding in his tirade the fact that in place of love, he substituted indifference and constant expressions of his profound disappointment in her not being a son he would truly appreciate. How does she repay his benevolence? Why, she plays the whore for a conniving goyish schnook, and expects him to welcome such a chiseler into the family fold along with his corrupted spawn. Only after exhaustingly venting his spleen, does the bastard execute his original intention and orders them to get out and never return, peremptorily declaring her dead to the family, thus forbidding her name ever to be spoken among them again. Being quite cognizant of human nature, I can readily appreciate the extreme satisfaction Dorothy's father must have felt knowing he not only freed himself of an aggravating obligation but, in the process, had crammed it up the Gentile's ass, who had planned to do the same to him. To an intrinsically paranoid Jew, nothing could be defensibly sweeter. Poor schnook Albert, having no other recourse, dejectedly headed for home with his bride in tow and his knuckles dragging, only to engage in a similar turbulent scene with his mother. If anything, the old lady's reactions were even more belligerent and scathing than the one they had recently endured. Once she was made aware of the facts and had read them the riot act, she came up with a decision concerning this matter. Hers was based on an ulterior selfish motive. It seems that for some time, unbeknown to Albert, his mother was being generously supplied with meat from a friendly neighborhood butcher. This plain, but honest, man had been proposing marriage amid his dual deliveries. She had delayed in accepting because she would have to explain this compromising affair to Albert. Now, this development made it entirely unnecessary to tell him anything, except what a blundering fool he was. This she furiously proceeded to do. Her anger thoroughly satiated, she phoned her mundane butcher friend and accepted his proposal, but only on the condition that he immediately come and claim her, bag and baggage. He anxiously complied. Although Uncle Albert forever blamed his ruination on Aunt Dorothy, I always felt he lucked out. In truth, he was never anything other than a vain, handsome lout, totally devoid of pride, and completely dependent on his mother for direction. When she took off, he quickly passed the burdensome responsibility to Dorothy who, out of sheer love and necessity, accepted it until her death 30 years later. I fondly remember her as a 300-pound lady consisting mostly of heart, who gave 100% to being wife, mother, and provider. This was a must in her case because Albert, in a desperate mood after their marriage, soon forfeited his job at the country club and decided to turn pro and go on the tour circuit. The results turned out disastrous, for he finished dead last in 7 tournaments, and no club wants a loser of this magnitude to further represent them. Of course, Albert contributed his loss to the pressure created by the gallery watching him. Perhaps attributable to practicing in private so much in the prone position, he suffered extreme stage fright when performing publicly on his feet. This final humiliation not only obliterated any vain illusions he'd been potently harboring, but also introduced him to hard reality. After this, Albert's contribution to the family coffers was usually minimal and never consistent. What little income he earned, during most of their marriage, came from working at various public golf clubs doing menial ground chores, but he'd also sneak in a few extra bucks by posing as caddy instructor. Fortunately, Dorothy had a talent for sewing alterations and dressmaking, and it was through these special skills they were able to survive. Ultimately, Dorothy gave birth to a lovely daughter named Dolores, who would be the only child she would ever bear. Having a knuckle-dragging husband to contend with, one child was quite sufficient. This was the sorry state of affairs my stepfather found on his return to St. Louis, but, unlike his first visit, he was warmly received by his brother and well tolerated by his mother. Losers, I've observed, seem to have a great affinity for one another. Albert insisted, and Dorothy wholeheartedly agreed, he was welcome to stay with them as long as he wished. I am sure she figured anything was worth a try in striving to improve Albert's morale and subsequent efforts. As it turned out, her supposition was correct. The two brothers, combining their energies with newfound fellowship, managed to sweeten the pot despite worsening economic times. Much of the credit for this can be attributed directly to Dorothy, who kept a clean home, fed them well, and saw to their clothes, while constantly inspiring them with compliments. It appears Jewish ladies have more cure-alls than just chicken soup. It was through Dorothy that Mother met my stepfather. Dorothy had done some sewing for her on different occasions and they had developed a friendship. Like all Jewish ladies, Dorothy was a natural matchmaker and lost no time in introducing her brother-in-law as a fine husband and stepfather material. I never could understand what my mother saw in him. They were totally different in personality. She was a friendly extrovert, and he was a sour introvert. She liked and trusted most people, he liked and trusted no one. She confided in me later she had married him because she was having a hard time making ends meet and taking care of me. I had reached school age and was now living full-time with her. During the week she would take me to school on her way to work. After school I would come home and play by myself until she arrived. I suppose she feared for my being alone so much and thought anything was worth a shot. Like most people, she didn't realize a child without other children to play with is really alone regardless of how many adults are around. There's usually just 3 ways a child can survive a lone environment. The child will create an imaginary world of its own in which to live, complete with playmates, animals, and whatever else it needs. I was not mentally qualified for this, because the cruel maturing realities I had encountered at a very tender age prevented me from engaging in childish fantasies. seek and demand the constant attention of the adults around, quickly becoming spoiled, selfish and a general pain in the ass. My past experiences ruled this out, as it taught me life is more peaceful when one maintains a quiet profile, and becomes self-centered and self-contained, needing and wanting few people around, and will prefer and enjoy its introspective existence. Those who evolve from this type, as I did, are usually described as loners with distant and sometimes antisocial personalities. It was during this time, while living with Mother, I began to develop a perceptive and analytical thinking process, which has benefited me throughout my life. I remember how difficult it was for me to understand why people were so concerned about my being left alone so much. I was living full-time with my mother, instead of just weekends, and could not have been happier. The neighbors, seeing what they wanted, always admired how brave and polite I was when accepting their morale-boosting offerings of sweets, pennies, etc. It didn't take me long to realize it paid to keep my mouth shut. Let people think whatever they wish if it pleases them and benefits me. Another important fact of life I learned early was that those who are gifted with pleasing looks have a tremendous advantage over the plain. This is especially true if attractiveness is coupled with common sense, and we are usually taken at face value. The better the face, the better the value. One nice woman, whose backyard joined ours, had a house full of pretty, young girls who generously gave me money and things I welcomed, in exchange for hugs and kisses, which I tolerated. Years later, as a young man, I visited this lady, perhaps I should say, madam, and she still had a bevy of beautiful girls equally generous and giving.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video.